The first snowflake was a whisper of a promise. The thousandth was a snarling threat. Outside the Cog and Compass diner, the world had vanished into a blinding vortex of white. The wind, a ravenous beast, clawed at the old building, rattling windows that had seen more winters than most men. Inside, 22-year-old Clara Mae Thompson moved with an economy of motion born from exhaustion. Her hands, usually steady enough to handle the microscopic gears of a timepiece, trembled slightly as she refilled a salt shaker. The diner, her grandfather's legacy, was her entire world. A small, warm bubble of worn-out vinyl and the lingering scent of coffee and fried onions, set against the unforgiving wilderness of the Colorado Rockies. "You should have gone home hours ago, Clara Mae," Walter, her grandfather, called from his usual stool at the end of the counter. His voice, once a hearty baritone that could command a room, was now a thready rasp, thin as the steam rising from his mug. At 78, his world had shrunk to this counter, watching his granddaughter fight a battle he could no longer lead. "And leave you to the mercy of this blizzard?" "Not a chance," she replied, managing a smile that didn't quite reach her tired gray eyes. "Besides, the apartment's just as cold, and the company's worse." The truth was a bitter pill she swallowed every day. They were losing. The diner, once a bustling hub for travelers on Route 70, was dying a slow death. Her grandfather's medical bills were a mountain, and the snow piling up outside was a perfect metaphor for the debt burying them alive. Each shift she worked was like bailing water from a sinking ship with a teaspoon. A violent gust of wind slammed against the door, making the bell above it jangle in a panic. The door flew open, forced inward by a man who looked as though he'd been carved from granite and dressed by a magazine. His overcoat, a cascade of black cashmere that probably cost more than her truck, was plastered with snow. He stumbled in, bringing the Arctic with him, followed by a procession of figures equally sleek, equally out of place. "Good God, is this place open?" the first man demanded, his voice a low growl of command. He shook the snow from his dark, silver-streaked hair, his sharp, predatory eyes sweeping over the humble diner with an expression of profound distaste. It wasn't just annoyance. It was the look of a king who had stumbled into a peasant's hut. "Kitchen's closed," Clara said, her voice flat. She instinctively disliked him. There was an aura of controlled violence about him, a sense that he could break things, companies, people, without changing his expression. "But the coffee's hot. Given the weather, I guess we're open for as long as it takes." "We're not here by choice, sweetheart," another man chimed in, this one with a slick, reptilian charm and a watch that glittered with diamonds even in the diner's dim light. "The pass is closed. A multi-car pileup. We're stranded." More of them filed in, their expensive leather shoes squeaking on the linoleum floor. They moved like a pack of wolves, confident and dangerous, surveying the territory. Clara did a quick, silent count. 15 of them. 15 men who radiated a level of wealth so extreme it felt like a different atmospheric pressure. "I am Julian Croft," the first man announced, not as an introduction, but as a statement of fact, as if the name itself should rearrange the molecules in the room. When Clara's expression remained one of polite indifference, a flicker of something, annoyance, surprise, crossed his face. "Croft Capital, perhaps you've heard of it." "Clara Mae Thompson, this is the Cog and Compass," she replied, her tone even. "Welcome." She had learned from her grandfather that you gave every man the same measure of respect, whether he arrived in a Rolls-Royce or on foot. It was up to him to prove he deserved more or less. Julian Croft's eyes narrowed. He was a man who lived in a world of reactions, fear, obsequiousness, greed. This young woman's placid neutrality was a language he didn't speak. He found it unsettling. He corrected his initial assessment. This wasn't a girl. The weariness in her eyes and the set of her jaw belonged to a woman who had fought battles he couldn't imagine. "We'll require lodging for the night," announced the man with the diamond watch. "Whatever you have, and we need to make some calls. My satellite phone is the only one with a signal." Walter cleared his throat from the counter. "Lodging's a strong word for it, mister. This is a diner. The only hotel in town is the Mountain View, and I guarantee it's been full since the first flakes fell." "The lines are down too," Clara added, already moving toward the coffee pots, her movements efficient and graceful. Cell tower gets iffy in storms like this. You're welcome to stay here. It's warm and it's safe. That's the best I can offer. The reality of their situation began to dawn on the group, their polished veneers cracking under the strain of genuine helplessness. These were the masters of the universe, men who could move markets with a word, and they were trapped in a roadside diner by a few feet of frozen water. This is unacceptable, one muttered. I have a merger to finalize in Zurich tomorrow. And I'm sure the snow will take that into consideration, Clara said over her shoulder, not bothering to hide the sarcasm. Julian Croft watched her, a strange fascination cutting through his irritation. She wasn't intimidated. She wasn't fawning. She was simply competent. In his world, competence was a commodity to be bought and leveraged. Here it was just a fact, like the storm outside. Coffee's $1, she announced, setting down a collection of mismatched, heavy ceramic mugs on the largest table. And I've got the last of a beef stew. It'll be $5 a bowl. We've also got apple pie, Granddad's recipe. Julian pulled a thick alligator skin wallet from his coat. We'll take all of it and keep the change. He tossed a crisp $100 bill onto the counter. Clara looked at the bill, then back at him. She didn't move to pick it up. I said coffee's $1 and the stew is $5. I'll bring you a check. Her gaze was direct and unwavering. We're not a charity, Mr. Croft, and we're not your servants. We're your hosts, because that's what people do when other people are in trouble. You can pay your bill like everyone else. A stunned silence fell over the room, broken only by the howl of the wind. The man with the diamond watch, Marcus Thorne, let out a low whistle. Julian Croft felt a hot flush of something he hadn't experienced since childhood. Embarrassment. This woman, who probably made in a month what he spent on a bottle of wine, had just effortlessly put him in his place. You're right, Julian said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. He was not a man who admitted fault. That was arrogant of me. I apologize. He retrieved the $100 bill. We would be very grateful for some of your grandfather's stew. Clara gave a single sharp nod, accepting the apology as her due. I'll be right back with it. As she disappeared into the kitchen, the men exchanged uneasy glances. They had been stripped of their power, their status rendered meaningless by the weather. Their tailored suits and seven-figure bank accounts were no defense against the cold. Here, the only currency that mattered was warmth, food, and the quiet, unyielding dignity of a 22-year-old waitress. She's got a spine of steel. I'll give her that, Marcus Thorne murmured, a strange, calculating look in his eyes as he stared at the kitchen door. Julian found himself agreeing. In his 42 years, he'd met women who wanted his money, his power, or his name. Clara Mae Thompson, it seemed, just wanted him to have a cup of coffee and pay the correct price for it. It was the most baffling and intriguing transaction he'd been a part of in decades, and as the night wore on, he realized he was seeing something he thought had gone extinct, a person with no angle. The hours crawled by in a surreal haze of brewing coffee and shared stories. The diner became a strange confessional, a neutral ground where egos were checked at the door along with the snow. Stripped of their assistants, their phones, and their power suits, the titans of industry began to resemble ordinary men. They talked about their first jobs, their children, their regrets. Clara and Walter moved among them, a silent, efficient team. Walter, despite his frailty, shared stories of the diner's history, of the famous blizzard of '82. Clara kept the mugs full and the conversation flowing, her presence a calming anchor in the storm. Julian Croft watched her, mesmerized. He watched her hands as she wiped down a table, the long, elegant fingers, the calluses on the pads, the faint grease stain under one nail. He saw her absently tighten a loose screw on the sugar dispenser with a flick of her thumbnail, a gesture of innate mechanical sympathy. There was a precision to her movements that was at odds with the simple, repetitive tasks she was performing. Around 2 a.m., as he sat nursing his fifth cup of coffee, he saw her pull a small notepad from her apron pocket. For a moment, she seemed to forget they were all there. Her pencil flew across the page, not writing words but sketching something intricate and complex. A series of interlocking gears and springs, a tiny, beautiful machine. What is that? He asked quietly, leaning forward. Clara started, her cheeks flushing as she quickly covered the drawing with her hand. Nothing. Just doodling. That didn't look like doodling, Julian pressed gently. It looked like an architectural blueprint for a Swiss watch. A shadow passed over her face, a flicker of old pain. My grandfather, she said, her voice low. He's a horologist, a watchmaker. Or he was. He taught me. Suddenly, the diner's name made sense. The Cog and Compass. It wasn't just a folksy name. It was a legacy. He's a master, Walter said from the counter, his voice filled with a weary pride. Could build a tourbillon from scrap metal and sheer will. Had a shop in Denver for 50 years. Thompson and Son, the finest timepieces west of the Mississippi. What happened? Julian asked, his investor's curiosity piqued. A master craftsman, a legacy business. It was the kind of undervalued asset he preyed upon. Life happened, Clara said, her voice tight, shutting down the conversation. Some tea, Mr. Thorne? Marcus Thorne, the man with the diamond watch, had been observing their exchange with a predatory stillness. A watchmaker, you say? Fascinating. I'm something of a collector myself. He extended his wrist, displaying the ostentatious timepiece. A Patek Philippe Sky Moon Tourbillon, a beautiful, complex machine. Clara's eyes flickered to the watch. She didn't look at the diamonds or the gleaming platinum case. Her gaze was sharper, more analytical, focused entirely on the movement visible through a cutout in the dial. Her expression was unreadable. It's very loud, she said finally, turning away to get the tea. Thorne laughed, a sound that didn't hold any real humor. It makes a statement. I'm sure it does, she murmured. As the first hints of dawn painted the sky in shades of bruised purple and gray, the storm began to break. The wind died down to a mournful sigh. Outside, the world was remade, buried under a thick, pristine blanket of white. Clara made one last round of coffee and served up a breakfast of scrambled eggs and bacon she'd scavenged from the freezer. The camaraderie of the night began to evaporate as the reality of their other lives seeped back in. Phones were checked, assistants were called, and the language of deals and deadlines replaced the more human conversations of the darkness. As the men prepared to leave, a convoy of heavy-duty SUVs, summoned by Thorne's satellite phone, crunched into the snow-covered parking lot. Julian approached the counter where Clara was tallying up their checks on an old-fashioned notepad. This has been, he began, searching for a word. Expensive? She offered, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. Illuminating, he corrected. He placed his Black American Express card on the counter. Thank you, Clara May, for everything. It was just a pot of coffee and a roof, Mr. Croft. It was more than that, he said, his voice serious. And please, it's Julian. For the first time, she met his gaze and held it, and he saw a flicker of warmth in the cool gray of her eyes. Drive safe, Julian. He wanted to say more. He wanted to ask about the drawings, about the watch shop, about the sadness he saw hiding behind her resilience. But the others were waiting. The world was calling, and he was a man who always answered. He walked out of the diner and back into his life, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving a crucial part of himself behind in the quiet warmth of the Cog and Compass. The next morning, the world truly arrived. Clara was clearing the breakfast dishes when she heard the rumble. It wasn't the familiar sound of a semi-truck gearing down. It was a deeper, more powerful hum, multiplied. She looked out the window and her jaw dropped. The parking lot, and the highway as far as she could see in both directions, was filled with cars. Not just any cars, a fleet of gleaming black sedans, luxury SUVs, and even a few exotic sports cars that had no business on a mountain pass in winter. She counted, her mind struggling to process the sight. There had to be over 100. A small army of drivers in black suits stood beside them, waiting patiently. The town of Eagle's Nest, population 412, had never seen anything like it. Murphy's Diner in the original story had 135 cars. This was just as overwhelming. The media descended like vultures. Apparently, one of the stranded billionaires was a media mogul, and the story of the Blizzard billionaires and the Angel of the Rockies was irresistible. The Cog and Compass went from a forgotten relic to the most famous diner in America overnight. For 3 weeks, life was a chaotic blur. The diner was packed from dawn till dusk. Tourists, reporters, curiosity seekers. They all wanted a piece of the story, a slice of Walter's famous apple pie, and a glimpse of the waitress who had tamed 15 titans of industry. The money was a godsend, a temporary reprieve from the crushing weight of their debts. But the attention was a suffocating blanket. Clara felt like an exhibit in a zoo. People took her picture without asking. They whispered as she refilled their coffee. They treated her not as a person, but as a character in a fairy tale. One afternoon, when the lunch rush had finally subsided, a sleek, dark gray sedan pulled into the lot. A car that was understated in its elegance and power. Julian Croft stepped out. He wasn't wearing the severe business suit from the storm, but a pair of well-fitted jeans and a dark wool coat. He looked younger, less formidable, but no less intense. He walked into the diner, and an immediate hush fell over the remaining customers. He ignored them, his eyes finding Clara behind the counter. "I was hoping the hysteria might have died down by now," he said, his voice low. "Not a chance," she replied, wiping down the counter with more force than necessary. "We're a human interest story. We'll be replaced by a heroic dog next week." "May I?" he asked, gesturing to a stool. She nodded. He sat down, and for a moment they were surrounded by an awkward silence. "I came to see if you were all right," he said finally. "All this—" He waved a hand at the room of gawking patrons. "It can't be easy." "It's good for business," she said evasively. "Is it?" He looked pointedly at Walter, who was moving slowly in the kitchen, his face pale with exhaustion. "He looks tired." Clara's jaw tightened. "We're managing." "I'm sure you are." He slid a business card across the counter. "That's the number for the best geriatric cardiologist in the country. He's at the Mayo Clinic. My jet can have you and your grandfather there by tomorrow morning. I'll handle everything." Clara stared at the card as if it were a snake. It was the same move as the $100 bill, just on a grander scale. He saw a problem, and he threw money at it. He was trying to fix her life, as if it were a poorly performing asset on his books. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "But my grandfather's care is none of your concern." "I'm trying to help, Clara." "No," she shot back, her control finally snapping. "You're trying to buy. You think because you have money, you can just swoop in and rearrange people's lives to your liking. You don't know the first thing about us, about our pride. This diner, this life, it's ours, the good and the bad. We don't need a knight in shining armor." Julian recoiled as if she'd slapped him. His face, usually a mask of cool control, showed a flash of genuine hurt. "That's not what this is." "Isn't it?" she challenged. "You came here to assuage your guilt, to make a charitable donation to the poor, noble waitress, so you can sleep better at night in your penthouse. But we are not your pet project." She pushed the business card back toward him. "Thank you for the coffee, Mr. Croft. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have tables to clear." She walked away, leaving him sitting at the counter, the silence in the diner now thick with tension. He had genuinely believed he was doing a good thing. In his world, this was how you showed you cared. You solved the problem. You eliminated the obstacle. He had never considered that the problem might not want his solution, that his help might feel like an insult. He was about to leave when Walter emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "She's a mule when it comes to pride," the old man said, his voice weary. "Gets it from her grandmother." "I seem to have a talent for offending her," Julian admitted. Walter poured 2 cups of coffee, pushing one toward Julian. "You're not used to people saying no to you, are you, son?" "No," Julian said honestly, "I'm not. You see a problem, you write a check. It's simple, clean. But people aren't that simple." Walter took a slow sip of his coffee. "You want to help her? Don't offer to fix her life. Offer to be a part of it. Not as a benefactor, as a friend." He looked at Julian with eyes that had seen a lifetime of human folly. "That girl's been carrying the weight of the world since her mother died. She's watching me fade away. She's watching this place, my whole life's work, crumble. She won't accept your charity, but I think she might accept your respect." Julian looked at the old man, then at Clara, who was bussing a table at the far end of the diner, her back ramrod straight. Respect. It was a currency he understood, but one he rarely traded in on a personal level. He was respected for his power, feared for his ruthlessness. But to offer respect to this young woman, what would that even look like? He left the diner with Walter's words echoing in his mind. He had built an empire by understanding value, leverage, and weaknesses. But Clara Mae Thompson operated on a different system entirely, one he couldn't analyze or acquire. And for the first time in his professional life, Julian Croft admitted to himself that he was completely out of his depth. The package arrived a week later, delivered by a special courier. It wasn't addressed to Clara, but to Walter. Inside was not a check, but a heavy leather-bound book. It was a first-edition copy of Le Guide de la Montre à Complication, the Holy Grail for watchmakers, a book so rare it was almost mythical. Tucked inside was a handwritten note on thick, cream-colored cardstock. Walter, a man of your skill deserves to be surrounded by the works of other masters. I hope this brings you some enjoyment. Please consider it a long overdue payment for the hospitality you and your granddaughter showed a group of very lost, very cold travelers. Respectfully, Julian Croft. P.S. For Clara Mae, you were right, I am learning. When Clara saw the book and the note, her carefully constructed defenses began to crumble. This wasn't charity. This wasn't a solution. It was a gesture of profound, specific, and thoughtful respect. He had listened. He had seen not just their poverty, but her grandfather's passion. He had treated him not as a patient to be fixed, but as a master of his craft. She found herself dialing the number on the business card she had so angrily rejected. His personal assistant answered, her voice crisp and efficient. "This is Clara Mae Thompson. Please tell Mr. Croft. Tell him thank you. The book, it was the first time I've seen my grandfather smile in a month." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "He said you might call. He also asked me to convey an invitation. He would like to take you to dinner. Not as a thank you, not as a business meeting, just as two people having a meal." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was dangerous territory. "Where?" "Wherever you'd like," he said, and I quote, "She gets to pick the place. My world or hers." The choice was a test. A 5-star restaurant in Denver would mean she was willing to step into his sphere of power. A local spot would be a challenge for him to meet her on her own terms. "There's a place in town called the Silver Fork," she said. "It's nothing fancy, but they make a good steak." "The Silver Fork," the assistant repeated. 7 p.m. on Saturday. He will be there." As she hung up, Clara felt a terrifying flutter of hope. It was an emotion she had long ago packed away, too fragile to survive in her harsh reality. But Julian Croft, with his blunt force and his surprising capacity to learn, was chipping away at the stone walls she had built around her heart. Maybe, just maybe, Walter was right. Maybe this wasn't about being saved. Maybe it was about being seen. Saturday night at the Silver Fork was a revelation. Julian arrived as promised, dressed not in a suit, but in a simple dark sweater and trousers. He looked entirely out of place and completely at ease. The conversation was stilted at first, two people from different planets trying to find a common language. But then Clara started talking about watches, about the simple, elegant perfection of a well-made machine. Her face lit up, the weariness vanishing, replaced by the passion of a true artist. Julian, in turn, spoke not of profits and losses, but of the architecture of a deal, the intricate dance of negotiation and strategy. He, too, was a builder of complex systems. "My grandfather's shop," she confessed, staring into her water glass. "Thompson and Son. We didn't just lose it, it was stolen." Julian leaned forward, his full attention on her. "What do you mean, stolen?" "A new partner. A man who came in with promises of expansion, of modernizing the brand. He was charming, convincing. He dazzled my grandfather with projections and market analysis." Her voice grew bitter. "He leveraged the company's assets for a series of high-risk loans, then cooked the books to hide the debt. By the time we realized what was happening, it was too late. He declared bankruptcy, and a shell corporation he secretly controlled bought up the company name and all our designs for pennies on the dollar. We lost everything. The shop, the house, my father's legacy." What was his name? Julian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Thorne, Clara whispered, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. Marcus Thorne. Julian Croft's face went entirely still. The warmth in his eyes was replaced by ice. He remembered the man from the diner, the slick charm, the ostentatious, diamond-encrusted watch, the calculating look in his eyes as he'd watched Clara. The man from the diner, Julian said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Clara looked up, her eyes pleading with him to understand. He was one of you. That night, I had to serve coffee to the man who destroyed my family, and I had to smile while I did it. Julian felt a cold fury rise within him, unlike anything he had ever known. It wasn't the impersonal anger of a business deal gone wrong. This was personal. Thorne hadn't just swindled a company. He had tried to extinguish the light in this woman's eyes. And Croft Capital, in its endless pursuit of profit, had done business with Thorne's new company. Unknowingly, Julian had profited from her family's destruction. He was complicit. His watch, Clara said, her voice barely audible. The Patek. He boasted about it. But it's not a real Patek. It's a custom piece, a Frankenstein. The casing is Patek, yes, but the movement, I recognize the escapement. It's a rare design by an obscure Belgian maker named Dubois. My grandfather knew him, said he was a genius, but a fraud. He had a tell, a signature flaw he deliberately built into every piece as an arrogant calling card. A tiny, almost imperceptible imbalance in the hairspring. It's a mark of pride, a secret joke for the creator. She finally looked at him, her gaze piercing. That night in the diner, I saw it. Thorne's watch has the Dubois flaw. Julian's mind, trained to see patterns and connections, went into overdrive. A custom watch with a fraudulent movement. A businessman who specializes in corporate theft. It was more than a coincidence. It was a character statement. He is not one of us, Clara, Julian said, his voice a low, intense growl. He reached across the table and, for the first time, took her hand. His touch was warm and firm. He is a predator, and predators need to be caged. In that moment, everything shifted. They were no longer a billionaire and a waitress. They were allies. A partnership was forged over a checkered tablecloth in a small-town steakhouse, a pact sealed by a shared enemy. What can we do? She asked, a flicker of her old hope rekindling. My resources are considerable, Julian said, a grim smile touching his lips, and my motivation is now significant. We are going to find every dirty secret, every shell corporation, every cooked book Marcus Thorne has ever touched. We are going to take back what he stole from you, and we are going to destroy him. The fight was on. Julian's office in Denver became their war room. Teams of forensic accountants and private investigators, the best money could buy, were unleashed on Marcus Thorne's empire. They worked relentlessly, digging their hour. The war was not fought in courtrooms, but in the sterile, air-conditioned silence of Julian's 40th floor office in Denver. A glass and steel cage overlooking a city that felt a universe away from the worn linoleum of the cog and compass. At first, Clara felt like a ghost haunting this alien landscape. The hushed reverence of Julian's staff, the silent glide of the elevators, the low hum of servers processing data that could swallow her diner's annual profits in a single microsecond. It was all designed to intimidate, to reinforce a hierarchy she had never acknowledged. She was not a bystander. Julian made that clear from the first day. He did not want her story, he wanted her mind. While his teams of forensic accountants, men with tired eyes and seven-figure salaries, scoured digital ledgers for discrepancies, Clara sat with stacks of her grandfather's old notebooks. They were filled with his spidery, elegant script, meticulous records of suppliers, material costs, and, most importantly, his designs. They were the diner's true legacy, more valuable than the building itself. They're missing it, she said one night. The city lights a cold, indifferent constellation beyond the window. The office was empty, save for the two of them. The air tasted of stale coffee and ozone. She pushed a worn, leather-bound journal across the vast expanse of Julian's mahogany desk. They're looking for large-scale fraud, for phantom corporations and laundered money. But Thorne didn't start there. He started small. He started with the screws. Julian, who had been staring at a complex financial model on a monitor, looked up, his focus shifting entirely to her. He had shed his suit jacket hours ago, his tie was loosened, and the weariness around his eyes made him look more human than she had ever seen him. Screws! Blued steel screws! They're used to hold the bridges of the movement in place. They're purely aesthetic, but a sign of quality. Granddad ordered them from a small supplier in La Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland. They're expensive. According to these invoices from Thorne's tenure as partner, the company was buying 10,000 units a month. She tapped the journal. But Granddad's designs for that period only required, at most, 500. Thorne was billing the company for 20 times the inventory we were using. And this supplier, she slid a separate sheet of paper across the desk, Gautier Mécanique, was dissolved 2 years ago. The address is a post office box in Geneva that traces back to a shell corporation. His shell corporation. He wasn't just cooking the books. He was siphoning the company's lifeblood out through 1,000 tiny cuts. Julian stared at her, a slow, profound admiration dawning in his eyes. His team, the best in the business, had been hunting for a whale and had missed the swarm of piranhas. She hadn't just given them a clue. She had given them Thorne's methodology, his philosophy of theft. It was the Rosetta Stone of his corruption. He leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning in the silence. You don't see balance sheets, Clara. You see the machine beneath them. You see how the gears mesh. It's all I've ever known how to do, she confessed, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. The fight was exhilarating, but it was also eating her alive. Every discovery was a fresh violation of her family's trust. Their relationship settled into a strange, intense rhythm, forged in the crucible of shared purpose in sleepless nights. It was a partnership of stark contrasts. He moved through the world with an effortless, predatory grace, a man accustomed to bending reality to his will. She moved through it with a quiet, observant resilience, a woman who had learned to mend what was broken because she had no other choice. He taught her the language of power, of leverage, of hostile takeovers, of asset forfeiture. She, in turn, reminded him of the language of value, of craftsmanship, of legacy, of integrity. He saw her not as a damsel to be rescued, but as a weapon he hadn't known he needed. She saw him not as a savior, but as a complicated, brilliant man who had built an empire, but had forgotten how to build a home. Thorne, feeling the invisible net tightening, did not resort to crude violence. His methods were more sophisticated, more cruel. He didn't slash her tires, he attacked her history. A legal notice arrived, informing them that the name The Cog and Compass was a trademark infringement on a holding company. A week later, an offer was made to buy the diner's mortgage from the local bank. It was an absurdly generous offer, one the small bank couldn't refuse, and the buyer was an anonymous LLC based in Delaware. Julian's team traced it back to Thorne in less than an hour. He wasn't just trying to scare her, he was trying to erase her, to own the last piece of her world and bulldoze it. The news sent a tremor of real fear through Clara. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about scorched earth. That night she called Julian, her voice a raw whisper. He's going to take the diner, Julian. He'll tear it down just to prove he can. Over my dead body, Julian's voice came back, a low growl of controlled fury. He's made a mistake. He's shown his hand. He's no longer a ghost in the machine. He's a target. We just need one more thing, something irrefutable. We need the watch. The plan was as audacious as it was terrifying. Thorne was scheduled to attend the annual Devereaux Foundation Gala, the pinnacle of Denver's philanthropic society. He would be surrounded by the city's elite, insulated by wealth and prestige. They couldn't just accuse him. They had to expose him in his own habitat. The night of the gala, Clara stood before the full-length mirror in Julian's guest suite, a stranger in her own skin. She was wearing a dress of deep emerald silk, a deceptively simple gown that had been delivered in a box that whispered of Parisian ateliers. It clung to her in a way that felt both elegant and armor-like. Her hair was swept up, revealing the graceful line of her neck, and a pair of discreet diamond earrings. A loan from Julian, she reminded herself, sparkled at her lobes. The grease under her fingernails was gone, scrubbed away, but she could still feel its phantom trace. Julian entered the room behind her, and her breath caught. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, the severe lines of which only accentuated the aura of power he carried so naturally. But it was the look in his eyes as he saw her that stopped the world. It was not the appreciative glance of a man looking at an attractive woman. It was something deeper, a look of profound, almost painful recognition, as if he were seeing a masterpiece that had been hidden under layers of dust and was only now being revealed to the light. "You look," he began, his voice hoarse, "like you could bring empires to their knees." "I feel like a fraud," she whispered, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't belong in a place like that, Julian. These people, they'll see right through me." He crossed the room in 2 strides and took her hands in his. His were warm and steady. "They will see a woman of substance and grace. Thorne and his kind, they wear their wealth like a costume. You wear your integrity like a second skin. There is no comparison." He paused, his thumb tracing a line over her knuckles. "Tonight, we are not asking for justice. We are taking it, and you will be the one to land the final blow. Just remember what you are fighting for." The ballroom was a glittering, cacophonous sea of champagne, diamonds, and calculated smiles. Clara felt 100 pairs of eyes slide over her, appraising her dress, her date, her very existence in their rarefied air. For a terrifying moment, she felt the old exhaustion, the desire to shrink back into the shadows. But then she felt Julian's hand, a firm, reassuring pressure at the small of her back, and she remembered. She was not a waitress here. She was a hunter. They found Thorne holding court near the orchestra, basking in the sycophantic laughter of his companions. He saw Julian and his smile tightened, but when his eyes landed on Clara, a flicker of confusion and then smug amusement crossed his face. "Croft," he said, his voice oozing insincere charm, "I didn't realize you were a patron of the arts, and you've brought your protégé." The word was a calculated insult. "Marcus," Julian replied, his own smile a razor's edge. "Clara and I are partners. We're exploring a new venture in artisanal craftsmanship, reviving a legacy brand." Clara stepped forward, her heart hammering, but her voice was steady. "Mr. Thorne, it's a pleasure to see you again." She extended a hand, forcing him to take it. His touch was cold and dry. Her eyes drifted, as if by accident, to his wrist. "That's a remarkable timepiece. I couldn't help but notice it in the diner that night. It's a Patek, isn't it? A sky moon?" Thorne's ego, vast and fragile, swelled at the attention. "Good eye. One of only a few in the world." He puffed out his chest, angling his wrist to catch the light. "The movement is extraordinary," Clara continued, her voice filled with a genuine horologist's fascination. It wasn't entirely an act. The mechanism was a work of genius, however corrupted its owner. The tourbillon cage is exquisite, but the escapement, it's a curious design. It reminds me of the work of Antoine Dubois. A bit of an eccentric, I've read. He had a peculiar habit of intentionally introducing a micro-imbalance in the hairspring, a sort of signature flaw. It's a detail only a true connoisseur would recognize. She let the words hang in the air. Thorne's smile faltered. She had just described his prized possession as both a masterpiece and a fraud in the same breath, a compliment wrapped around a razor blade. He didn't know how to respond. A few of the people listening exchanged curious glances. "You know a surprising amount about watches for a waitress," Thorne sneered, trying to regain control. "My grandfather taught me," Clara said, her voice soft but resonant. "He taught me that an honest machine tells the truth. Every gear, every spring tells a story, and a flawed design always, eventually, reveals the character of its maker." She held his gaze for a beat longer, a silent declaration of war, before allowing Julian to guide her away. Across the room, a photographer hired by Julian, posing as a society journalist, lowered his camera, a long lens having captured every microscopic detail of the watch face Thorne had so arrogantly displayed. They had it. They had the proof. The confrontation did not happen in the sterile gleam of a courtroom. It happened where it all began, under the warm, forgiving lights of the Cog and Compass. Thorne arrived not with thugs, but with a team of lawyers, their briefcases filled with foreclosure notices and cease and desist orders. He had come to finalize his victory, to watch Clara Mae Thompson sign away her grandfather's legacy. He found Julian Croft sitting at the counter, nursing a cup of coffee, with Walter Thompson in the booth behind him, frail but dressed in his Sunday best, his eyes as sharp as they had ever been. Clara stood behind the counter, an apron tied around her waist, as if it were just another Tuesday morning. "This is a private matter, Croft," Thorne's lead attorney began, a man with a face like a clenched fist. "I'm a party to the matter," Julian said calmly, taking a sip of coffee. "I bought the bank. The diner's mortgage is now my asset, and I have no intention of foreclosing." The lawyer's jaw dropped. Thorne's face flushed a dangerous shade of purple. "You think you can just throw your money around and stop this? I have you beat, Croft. I have the name, the patents, the brand. This little roadside shack is the last piece, and I will have it." "You have nothing," Clara said, her voice cutting through the tension. "You have a collection of stolen art, and you've been passing it off as your own." She placed an iPad on the counter and turned it to face Thorne. On the screen was not a video call, but a series of documents. "These are the original design schematics for the T-17 caliber, the cornerstone of your new company's flagship watch. You filed the patent for this 3 years ago." She swiped the screen. A new image appeared, a page from one of Walter's journals, dated 10 years prior. It showed the exact same design, rendered in her grandfather's elegant, unmistakable hand. There were notes in the margin, calculations, even a coffee stain in the corner. "And this," she swiped again, "is my grandfather's journal, his intellectual property, dated 7 years before you ever walked into his shop. We have 52 more notebooks just like it, an unbroken chain of creation that predates your entire career in horology." Thorne stared, speechless. This was not a corporate raid, it was an archaeological dig that had unearthed his original sin. "The patents will be invalidated," Julian said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "The company you built will be worthless by the end of the quarter. Your investors, many of whom are my friends, are already being notified of your fraudulent claims of intellectual property. And your watch," Walter rasped from the booth, his voice thin but clear as a bell. "The Dubois movement, a beautiful piece of theft. But you made a mistake. You forgot that a true master always signs his work." Clara swiped to the final image on the iPad, the crystal-clear photograph from the gala, magnified 1,000 times. She pointed to a spot on the screen, a place where a bridge was secured to the base plate, a detail no larger than a grain of sand. "Dubois' flaw was the hairspring, but my grandfather's signature was this, a single blued screw where all the others are polished steel, a deliberate imperfection, a mark of authenticity. Your watchmaker was good, Thorne. He copied the design perfectly, but he didn't know he was supposed to copy the mistake. Your watch," she said, her voice ringing with the force of absolute truth, "is a forgery of a stolen design." In that moment, Marcus Thorne was not a titan of industry. He was a small, hollow man, stripped bare in a roadside diner. The edifice of his life, built on lies and theft, crumbled to dust around him. He didn't roar. He didn't lunge. He simply sagged, the fight draining out of him, leaving behind the empty shell of a man who had been outplayed, outmaneuvered, and utterly finally defeated. The sheriff, who had been quietly sipping coffee at the far end of the counter, stood up and walked toward him. The aftermath was not a sudden, happy ending. It was a slow, quiet dawn. The legal battles were messy, but their outcome was never in doubt. Thorne's empire was dismantled, and the name Thompson and Son was returned to its rightful owners. The other 14 billionaires from that stormy night, galvanized by Julian's quiet campaign and the sheer drama of the story, did not just offer money. They offered their expertise, their networks, their respect. Thompson and Son was reborn not as a charity case, but as a boutique firm with the backing of some of the most powerful men in the world. Walter never worked at the bench again, but his health stabilized under the care Julian had arranged. He spent his days in a comfortable chair by the diner's window, the rare book from Julian on his lap, acting as the company's revered master consultant. His true work was done. He had seen his legacy secured and his granddaughter find a partnership worthy of her. He passed away peacefully in the spring, a quiet smile on his face. On a crisp autumn afternoon, 2 years after the blizzard, the cog and compass was alive. The original counter and stools remained, scarred with the stories of decades, but the back room had been transformed. It was now a workshop of breathtaking beauty, a fusion of old-world wood and modern glass, where sunlight streamed in over benches laden with the intricate tools of the trade. The words etched on the glass door read, "Thompson and Croft." Clara stood at her workbench, a loupe pressed to her eye, her hands steady as she set the final jewel in a new movement. The exhaustion was gone from her eyes, replaced by a deep, quiet concentration. She was not the woman the storm had found. She was the woman the storm had forged. Julian came to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. He didn't feel the need to fill the silence. He had learned from her that the most profound moments were often the quietest. He had divested from the more predatory wings of his firm, recentering his work on businesses that, like this one, created tangible value. He had discovered that the thrill of building something was infinitely more satisfying than the thrill of acquisition. "The hairspring is seated," she murmured, her voice a soft counterpoint to the gentle ticking of a dozen clocks on the wall. "It's breathing. What will you call this one?" he asked. She turned in his arms, her gray eyes now the color of a calm morning sky, meeting his. A smile touched her lips. "The compass. To remind us that sometimes you have to get completely lost to find out where you're supposed to be." He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that held no fire of conquest or desperate need, but the slow, deep warmth of homecoming. They had not saved each other. They had simply made space for the other to become who they were always meant to be. He had given her the power to reclaim her world, and she had given him a world worth reclaiming. Outside, the first snowflake of the season drifted past the window. No longer a threat, but a whisper of a promise already kept.